VikesNow, I am Dustin Baker. We are kicking it on the June 27th edition, about four and a half weeks from training camp. And I think we can confidently say that the offseason is now officially in the rear view. Of course, in theory, the Vikings could sign somebody like Marcus Peters or Robert Quinn, or the Neil Hunter trade could still shake down, or it could be extended. But for the most part, I think we've seen the grand body of the Vikings offseason. So I want to lasso, I think, the five most important lessons learned for the short term and the long term that have been offered by Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. And I'm going to go from 5 to 1, and these are ranked in order of importance. So when we get to number 1, in my estimation, is the most important for the trajectory of the franchise. So the first, the number 5, so the least important on the list of 5 lessons learned from the Vikings offseason is a large no thank you to aging veterans. You saw it across the board. It wasn't hard to predict, especially after they lost in the playoffs in the first round to the Giants. Change was afoot, more effectuation of a competitive rebuild that we'll talk about here in about 10 minutes. That was a no-brainer. So a lot of the fringe theories that we didn't talk about much in December and January about Dalvin Cook leaving or Adam Thielen or Eric Kendricks leaving, those all came true. So I think what the Vikings did is they asked themselves inside this competitive rebuild, is player A going to get better in 2023 and into 2024? If the answer is yes, probably, then he stays put. Or we go out and find that guy like Marcus Davenport, Byron Murphy, who fits that criteria. If the answer is no, Adam Thielen probably isn't going to have a resurgence, or Dalvin Cook or Eric Kendricks have peaked and aren't going to get better, then you got to hit the back door. That was kind of the philosophy on display. It was an absolute mass exodus of veteran would-be free agents or guys they straight up released because they were too expensive. And for how Kwesi Adofo-Mensah is sculpting the team in a vision of his own, that's a big damn deal. These are a lot of beloved names that, just they don't work here anymore. So I think the pivot to more affordable, younger, and faster folks, especially on defense, was the fifth biggest lesson learned of this offseason, and it also just so happened to involve players that you really loved throughout 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and Thielen's case, 10 years of Vikings football. So that's number 5. No thanks to aging veterans. Absolutely no thank you to those dudes that aren't going to improve beyond 2023. Number 4 is the pronounced emphasis. It's on the billboard of offense, and more offense. When we look back at the 2023 NFL draft, you're going to see a golden opportunity. The Vikings could have drafted a defensive player, whether that was Deonte Banks or Joey Porter, who ultimately went at the top of round 2. When you analyze or do an autopsy of the season before, so in this case 2022, you would see that the Vikings defense ranked 27th in DVOA, 30th in points allowed, and 31st in yards allowed. Normally, that would be a mandate for the general manager to say, we got to fix this defense, baby. And therefore, our first pick in the draft, if we don't trade back, is going to be a keynote defender, because that was clearly what was lacking. Almost inexplicably, if you don't follow the Vikings closely, they were like, nah, that's cool. We don't need any more defense. We've got our free agent 2 guys, and we like what we have from the young pool on the roster. And therefore, they went with Jordan Addison. He, of course, in time will replace Adam Thielen. Hopefully, he wins the job out of the gate. But if you needed a contrast to the Mike Zimmer era, which lasted 8 years, to the Kevin O'Connell era, there is no better example than the first-round draft selection by these Vikings on April 27th. It was a prime-time opportunity to get better on defense because your defense was shitty the year before. They said, no thanks, we're going to have a defensive coordinator fix all that. His name's Brian Flores, and we're going to get rich on offense because we're going to get Jordan Addison to partner with Justin Jefferson for the next probably 5 years at least. And that's a big deal because we spent 8 years and even beyond that with Leslie Frazier in charge as a defensive brand of football. And I think the punctuation mark was the choice. When you could have had Deonte Banks, you went with Jordan Addison. And this is certainly fun. If Addison works out, great. But right now, beyond anybody's shadow of doubt, the Vikings are an offense-first enterprise, and you just have to thank your lucky stars that they got one of the best candidates for a defensive coordinator on the open market in Brian Flores. So number 5 was no thanks to aging veterans. Number 4 was a lot more offense than we're used to. We just recovered from 8 years of the Zimmer era, and boom, now it's offense out the wazoo, and Addison is the best evidence of that pick. Number 3, this is quiet. This flew under the radar. If you watch this show, maybe not, but if you're just getting used to Vikings football again, coming back to the party because training camp's about a month away, the Vikings are going to run the ball more in 2023. They're just not going to do it with Dalvin Cook. That is kind of the paradox of the offseason. Per play calling percentage, the Vikings ranked 3rd least in handing the football to running backs last year. They didn't do it very often, and when they did do it, it wasn't very good outside of Dalvin Cook's home run, touchdown runs, and was a touchdown catch against the Colts. So the Vikings were not very effective in running the ball, and somebody in Egan said, we need to fix this. We need balance in our play calling, because if we're just going to throw the ball all the time, we're going to drag time of possession to the depths of hell because we're not churning out, the time. Running the ball takes longer than passing the ball because there's no incomplete passes. And somebody realized that we need to become a more balanced play calling outfit. And it was a little bit weird that you'd take your RB1 and cut him, and then promote the RB2, but it goes back to the first point that I made. Aging veterans, this is no country for old men when it comes to the Vikings. But they are going to run the ball more, whether that's signing Josh Oliver from the Ravens or keeping the same offensive line intact. We're going to have the same fivesome in the offensive trenches for the first time in like 10 years since the Bryant McKinney days. And then even Alexander Madison at OTAs said that this has been a point of emphasis. We're going to run the football more. Now, it should be no surprise that in the former quarterback's first year as a head coach, he rested on his laurels. He just wanted to fling it. Totally understandable why that would happen. But somebody reined it in and said, you know what? We should probably run the football. It'll keep the defense off the field longer. And hey, we might actually be good at this because the skill set of this offensive line group is more geared towards running the football, thanks to Rick Spielman's draft acumen. So, running the football more. I didn't know if that would be a point of emphasis. I thought it should be, but kind of when free agency hit and Oliver was the first signing, and then you started listening to some of the whispers, Dwayne McBride was drafted in round 7. That's another thing that showed that they're going to have oomph in running the football. It's all but confirmed. At least their words say they're going to run the football, and that's important because you do want that offensive balance. Number 2 is, make no mistake, the competitive rebuild that was advertised by this general manager is real. It was in living color this offseason. Eric Kendricks, Dalvin Cook, Adam Thielen, Dalvin Tomlinson, Patrick Peterson, Duke Shelley, Cameron Dantzler, Chandon Sullivan. God, who else am I forgetting? I think I'm forgetting 1 or 2. They don't play for the Vikings anymore. Now, not all of those guys were old, but most of them probably had seen their better years, and they're chilling in the rear view. So the philosophy by Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, which he said almost from day one, is that we're going to live in the now and in the future. We're going to he didn't say thread the needle, but you can reasonably extract that. We're going to do both. We don't believe in tanking. He calls it unconscionable. And then I don't think he absolutely believes in the 2020 Rams philosophy, or the Rams philosophy in general, which is just trade your first-round picks for veterans and hope you win a Super Bowl. It worked for them. Great. I don't think Adofo-Mensah subscribes to that theory. I know he doesn't because he hasn't effectuated any of that at all. So when you say goodbye to a lot of longtime veterans that aren't, crazy old, like 35, 36, they're all in that range of, all right, they're probably going to start dropping off. And then you really start to look at your roster and say, we like Lewis Seen, we like Andrew Booth, we like Caleb Evans, all of the guys that he's drafted, unsurprisingly, he likes. So I think through their actions, last year we had their words that says we're going to do a competitive rebuild. And then folks looked and said, well, you're keeping Kirk Cousins. This isn't a competitive rebuild. You're running it back. Well, this part, so last year was the competitive part. This year is the rebuild part of the competitive rebuild. And put the two words together, and that's what Adofo-Mensah said since he got here in the Twin Cities that he was going to do. So you saw a lot more of the offloading personnel, the rebuild part, and a emphasis or an endorsement of the younger guys. And I know it frustrates a lot of people, especially national experts that are like, the Vikings team doesn't know what it's doing. Are they all in or are they tanking? And it's like, no, they're not doing either one. He's said that he's not going to do either one. You just haven't listened. So the competitive rebuild is here in the now. It started, little driblets of it last year. It showed up in March, and it was in your face. It's happening right now, and we'll see how competitive that they'll be in 2023. Right now, I think I've said on this show, or maybe a different podcast, that I'm at 10-7 range for wins and losses, willing to be talked into 11-6 because the schedule is pretty damn brutal. All right, number one, the most important item or lesson learned from the 2023 offseason is, on paper, this is the last ride for Kirk Cousins. We have not been in this situation before since number 8 came to Minneapolis in 2018. At this time, May or June on the calendar, he's always got an extra 2 years on his deal. He doesn't have to sweat a contract year like he did on the franchise tag with the Washington Commanders. But if Kwesi Adofo-Mensah indeed wanted to wrap up the Kirk Cousins era, he wanted to find his guy of the future, probably from the draft, this is the way it would be scripted. You have your expensive quarterback that you put on borrowed time by not extending his contract. You claim that you're going to talk about it again next February or March, or at least that's what Cousins says. But right now, and I don't expect there to be any extension, especially because Cousins said, we'll talk about it next March. This is the way to hop on the off-ramp for Kirk Cousins. This exact situation. You say, well, we're going to let you hit free agency. And then Cousins next year will have a world tour, a lot like Derek Carr, back in February and March. And I fully expect, I'll say it 100 times between now and next March, for Cousins to march to the San Francisco 49ers, who absolutely crave and require a durable quarterback, because the one time they did, Jimmy Garoppolo in 2019, they got to the Super Bowl, and they were one pass away from beating Patrick Mahomes' Chiefs. So I firmly believe that if Cousins hits free agency, he will become a 49er. It won't cost them anything via trade. But the most important thing you can extract from this offseason, because of how vital a QB1 is to a football team, is that you're probably, when it's all said and done, going to look back March or February and say, oh, they didn't extend Cousins' contract last year. That was the beginning of the end. Now, hopefully he surprises everybody and they go 13-4 again, but this time actually get to the Super Bowl. And then you can just give the guy a lifetime contract and let him retire here because, he would have won the Super Bowl. But I don't know if that's realistic. We shall see. I think you can fasten your seatbelt and realize that outside of really impressive teams, I already know, this is the team I'm talking about, I already know Cousins is going to throw 4,300 yards, 31 touchdowns, and 10 picks. He does it every year. Every year he does that. That's coming. Now, whether or not Brian Flores can effectuate the defense into respectability or even prominence, that remains to be seen, because if you can couple Cousins setting or tying the NFL record for game-winning drives and these situational masters that they call themselves, if you can take that offense part and pair it with a defense that's decent, the sky is the limit. I just don't know if they'll be able to do it. So there is a really decent chance that come January, blah, 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 we're like, damn it, the Vikings lost in the divisional round to the Eagles or something like that. And I don't think that will be enough to retain Cousins into his age 36 season at that point. So I think the most important item gleaned from this offseason is that Kirk Cousins is no longer attached to the organization for longer than one season. All right, we'll be back with Josh Fry, I think, tomorrow. And I'm not even sure what we're going to talk to him about. We'll figure that out for the rest of the day, and I will talk to you guys then. Skol, baby.